Hello, my name is Jay Walter, and this is Rebuilding. Oliver Wendell Holmes said, "A mind that is stretched by a new experience can never go back to its old dimensions." So let's stretch our minds, find answers to problems, overcome fears, and rebuild our first kingdom. Hello, and welcome back to another podcast of the Rebuilding Show with Jay Walter. I've got my good friend and engineer and producer Brad Neufeld with me, and a very special guest we have is Lark Galley.
Yes, hello.
How are you?
Doing great. Thank
Good.
you.
So we've got a special show planned for you today. Lark has actually requested to be interviewed on the show, and let me tell you just a little bit of her background, and then we'll let her introduce herself and kind of get into the meat of our show today. So she has 4 children and 4 grandchildren. Grew up all over the United States. Her parents love to try new things, but have been in Utah for the past 23 years. Her background is in business, corporate America for 25 years, then owning her own business. She's also been coaching business owners, but has recently felt in her heart that this needed to change. So welcome, Lark, and why don't you just give us a little bit of more background, what you'd like people to know about you.
Sure. So it's one of those things where you go through life and you think you have it all planned out, and then things change. And one of those things happened back in 2010 when my mother-in-law died fairly young, and I realized that none of us are guaranteed anything, right?
Right.
And we could go at any time. And I, quite frankly, was not very happy. I had a big corporate job, big bucks, big house, big car, everything from the outside looked, oh, this is great. But what was going on is, my job was like, you don't work enough. And I'm thinking, 9-10 hours a day, I think I work enough, right? And then I had young kids. The oldest at the time was 15, and then the preteens coming up on there. And you probably know that the best time for teens to get in trouble is between 3 and 5 p.m.
Yeah. And
then I wasn't spending enough time with them. I wasn't spending enough time with my husband. So everybody's unhappy with me, which consequently I'm unhappy with me. And I then within the next year of her passing, I walked away from it all. And my husband was like, whoa, this is a big thing. It was a leap of faith. And I just said, I need to do this for our family. And then I started my own business and was able to rebuild and did well. But it was a leap of faith, but I felt inside that that's what I needed to do. So like I said, you kind of think your ladder's leaning against the right wall, and then you realize it's not. And thankfully, I was able to make some changes to have more time with the kids.
Oh, wow. That's great. So this new business helped you to spend more time with the family, spend more time with your husband.
Yep.
That's
Yes.
great. That's love to hear those kind of stories. So, so when we talked before, after you started, or tell us a little bit about why you wanted to be on the podcast today.
Sure. So I feel that, my whole mission was helping entrepreneurs streamline their business, do all these things that I've been able to do with my businesses. I was working on average 1 hour a week in the trucking business that I own. And so that was coaching and just doing all these things to help people be able to have more time with their families. And then 12 weeks ago tomorrow, that changed. My son died by suicide. And he was 19 years old. He was a college freshman at the University of Utah in mechanical engineering, something he had dreamed about since he was 6 years old. And he had friends, he had hobbies, he had plans. And so we didn't see it at all. It was a shock. And after that happened, I just kind of had once again, a whole change in a 180 in the direction that I was going. And I just felt called to share my message about having value. We all have value, and we need to take care of ourselves.
So did you see any signs leading up to this? Anything subtle that you look back on now that you...
Well, as I look back, I've been taking classes and reaching out and learning more about suicide because I didn't know it was the number 1 killer of youth in Utah. Had no idea. And, as a parent, I try to make sure my kids are safe, right? And I think, why wasn't this, talked about more? If it's the number 1 killer, don't you think parents would want to know? So I started posting about that. But as I look back and I've learned more about the whole, what the therapists call a journey of suicide, it's not just a decision, it's a journey. And what happens is that people who are depressed or they feel suicidal, they're hurting and they're in such a bad, dark place that it's like a physical pain. And I've been there myself where, just felt so depressed. And it takes a lot of work. Maybe you need some help to get out of that place. But once they're in that dark place, then they come up with a plan, or they start thinking of suicidal thoughts. And they're kind of afraid of these thoughts. They're horrified by them themselves. And so they don't want to talk to other people about them because they don't want other people to be horrified and think they're a terrible person. Mm-hmm. And so that's one key, is to really talk about it and say right up front, are you suicidal? Are you feeling like you might hurt yourself? We can't, pussyfoot around and say, oh, do you feel bad today? Or use the words, because then if they are feeling suicidal, it's not going to push them over the edge. It's actually going to help them be able to talk about it. And then what happens is they maybe go into this place where when they look depressed before and sad before, suddenly they're happy and you think they're fine. But in reality, they've come up with a plan and they're just biding their time. Mm. And that's really sad, because what had happened 3.5 years ago, before my son died, right before he turned 16, he was, exhibiting some signs of just being suicidal tendencies, that type of thing, kind of detaching. And my husband's in the military, and so he's had suicide training. And so he noticed this in my son and said, are you feeling suicidal? Do you feel like you are wanting to hurt yourself? And my son said, yes, I am. And that was on a Sunday evening, and we had him into a therapist the next day. Mm. And I was there, and I was waiting outside, and then I came in, and the therapist said, well, to my son, his name was Christian, do you want to tell your mom, or do you want me to tell her? Kind of like, this is big revelation. I can't wait to hear this. Yeah. And so he said, no, I'll tell her. And he said, Mom, I don't believe in God. I believe in science. And that was the big bombshell, right? And I'm like, okay, son, well, I believe God is science, but, you run with that. And he was thinking that I was going to have this big fit, that he couldn't talk to me about it. And I'm like, I can't make you believe anything. Yeah. So that was kind of, he was feeling like he wanted to talk to us, but he didn't feel like he could, which is unfortunate. And I think it's important for parents to understand, you need to create an environment such that your children can come and feel they can say anything, and they're not going to, you're not going to throw them out of the house. You're not going to disown them. You're going to love them, accept them, and just say, all right, there you go. And that was key. And so he went to the therapist for a few months and had a plan. If he was feeling suicidal, what was he going to do? He had these plans. And after those 3 months, he's like, Mom, I'm good. I'm feeling really good. And he was. Mm, yeah. And then, it went 3 years, and then he wasn't. And it just got too much. There were some pressures in his life. But I had learned that from a therapist that what happens is they go into this happy state, and they're happy because they have their plan. And they can check out whenever it gets too tough. And some things that had happened right before he killed himself was that he had been in a car accident the week before. Mm-hmm. And then he had had 2 prior speeding tickets, because, 19-year-old boys and a sports car, they probably don't mix. Don't mix, yeah. And we said, you're probably going to lose your license. And the week after he passed away, we got a letter from the DMV. Yes, he had lost his license, right? So 19 years old, that's a big pressure. You're like, wow, the world has ended if I don't have a driver's license. Right. And then the other thing is his grades had started to slip a little bit at the U, and he just felt like he was struggling a little bit. It's, engineering, mm-hmm. It was hard. Yeah, I've been through that. Yeah. And I think that he also felt maybe he was letting down his father. He and my husband were very close, best friends. And, my husband had to talk to him. He came in that night from school. It came in late. He had been studying and at the lab and getting help. And my husband said, hey, actions, consequences, right? It was just one of those parental talks, mm-hmm. which then probably pushed my son over the edge. And so my husband felt very guilty when he found him the next day, dead. And he was completely distraught. And what I tried to explain to my husband is, we don't know what had happened earlier in the day. We don't know if maybe he would have killed himself in a month, in a year. We don't know. And as parents, what we struggle with is, how much do you push your children? You want them to do better. You want them to do well. But there's kind of a balance. And sometimes you don't know. Right? And that's where the regret comes in. It's like we look back and say, why didn't we know that he was maybe still suffering? We had no clue. Yeah. That I have 7 children myself, and so that how you would have to approach each one differently.
their personalities. And I've got a couple children that deal with depression, and so it is really hard to know how much to talk to them and how much to encourage, how much to kind of push. Those are probably the hardest things for parents to learn, and you really do have to learn it yourself. And the resources seem, unless you really know what to look for, are hard to find to me. How are you finding those resources to go and help other people?
So I've been reaching out, and I just feel like I need to talk about this, right? And so I've been reaching out and just being honestly directed by God to do certain things. It says, find other people who have podcasts and get your message out, because I was like, how do I get it broader? And then I'm connecting with different suicide prevention foundations. I've connected with, at least 5 or 6 in the last couple weeks. I'm going to go help volunteer with a couple of them and just help where I can, and maybe go into schools with some of these groups and talk to kids, talk to parents, and share my message and what I have learned and how we can cope with this, try to get help for anyone who's feeling this, and especially for parents, maybe they've gone through it where their child has passed away. How do you then go on?
Yeah. Absolutely. That's probably the hardest then, is the feelings of guilt and suffering. There's a gentleman who's a member of the Kings whose son, they don't know if it was suicide or an accident or not, but he shot himself. And he wrote a book about his whole process of the grieving process, and the things he missed, and the things he did right, and the things he did wrong, and trying to help other people understand his story. So that it is hard to understand how to deal with that grief. I've lost 2 brothers, not to suicide, but to accidents, and to see my mom, how she grieved for the loss of her sons. And I don't know, losing brothers is tough, but being a parent of those children, I can't imagine losing any of my children and how that would affect me.
It's heartbreaking. It's out of the normal cycle and something you would never expect. And especially when they're so young, you have these hopes for them and things that they can accomplish and experience in their life, and have that cut short. That, I understand cycle of life. I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
But when someone ends their life and it didn't have to be that way, that's the tragedy.
Yeah. So you talk about you're out teaching children. How important do you see the education of children to help their friends and help themselves? What goes through in that process that you've learned in the last?
Well, I'll tell you a little bit about how it came about, because if you had told me 12 weeks ago that you're going to talk about suicide and you're going to be out on the radio or on podcasts or whatever, I would have said, oh no, that will never happen. My father had passed away 5.5 years ago, and it had been from suicide, but I couldn't even talk about that. I could just said he passed away, and I left it at that. And for 5 months, I went into a dark hole, and I don't even remember how my kids got fed, because I couldn't talk about it. I couldn't face reality. And then when my son passed away, from suicide, once again, I just started to go into that black hole of denial, and I can't talk about it. And so it was 2 days after he passed away, I finally wrote on social media, hey, our son passed away. And that was it. There was no way, I was going to say suicide, because the stigma, the embarrassment, the shame, what were you doing as a parent that you didn't know this? Or what was going on with your son? Or all of this went through my mind. But then after I posted it, I had so many friends reach out to me with kids who knew my son. And they told me that this one girl who knew my son, she took a bottle of pills the year before, and they had to have her in the hospital. Fortunately, they found her, but they had her in the hospital for a week. And, but they were still concerned about her. She still, was feeling these feelings of suicide. And then another friend with a boy, my same boy's age, that they knew each other, he was already feeling somewhat depressed. And this was just kind of putting him into a darker hole. And then another person reached out and said that she had her son come home. He was out of state with school, had him come home because she didn't want him to find out about his friend Christian while he was out at school. And so she had him come home that week before the funeral and tried to give him help. So all of these things were happening. People were reaching out to me, and I started thinking about this over the next few days. And I thought, I can't control my son's choice. That's been made. I can't control if another child chooses to take their life. I can't control that. What can I control? I can only control myself. And if, how it is with suicide, they have this like copycat suicide, right?
Yeah.
If one of these kids who knows my son decides to take their life and I didn't speak up, then that's on me. And I can't live with that.
Right.
And so suddenly it went from being about me to being about the kids. And I posted on Tuesday, so it wasn't even a week after my son had died. He had died on Thursday. I just posted out there on Facebook. I said, my son died of suicide, and this is what happened. And if you're hurting and you're feeling like you're in a dark place, then please reach out and get help. There is help for you. It's available. Let's talk about it. Even though you're hurting just by, ending your life, that is not the answer, because that pain just transfers to 100 other people.
Yeah.
And it doesn't stop. And then I was just, letting people know we need to talk about this. Let's make it a safe place, and let's make it okay to talk about. So many people responded to that text or that Facebook message that I posted. And then I texted or I reached out to all the moms who had contacted me about their kids. And I said, I posted this. Please read this with your child. And several of the moms got back to me and said, my son cried when I read this post that you put up. Another one said, my daughter has completely changed. She understands that suicide is not the answer, and she's willing to look for alternatives. So I feel like by doing that, I had saved those kids' lives.
Yeah.
And then suddenly it became like I just had to talk about it more and more, the more I learned about what was going on with this epidemic.
Cool. Well, let's take a quick break here, and when we come back, we'll talk more about how to educate ourselves and educate our children with this epidemic of suicides in Utah. But we'll be right back.
Hello, my friends. This is Brad Neufeld, host of the Five Kingdoms radio show right here on the Tribe of Kings Information Network. Be sure and tune in weekly to hear the latest and greatest on the Tribe of Kings, and also to learn all those things that you need to do to be the best that you can be.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jay Walter, host of Rebuilding, a radio show right here on the Tribe of Kings Information Network. Be sure to tune in weekly to hear more about the Tribe of Kings and to learn how to overcome fear and rebuild your life every day as you become the man you want to be. Welcome back to Rebuilding with Brad Neufeld as my engineer and producer, and Lark Galley is my special guest. Before the break, we were talking about watching for signs and watching kids. Tell me, what brought you to this point that you really wanted to start talking? You told us a little bit about wanting to reach out to other people and how it's helped some other children. What brought you to this point that you want to be on?
So on that Thursday that my son died, that night we had one of our church leaders came over and gave my husband a blessing and me a blessing. And as he's giving me this blessing of comfort, he stopped in the middle of it. He paused, and then he said, Lark, you have a lot of work to do. A lot of work to do. And I'm thinking to myself, what the heck? I have just had one of the most emotionally charged days of my life. You're talking about work? Like, I'm thinking business work, right? I'm like, how is that relevant? How do you think I even care about that? And I was shocked. I thought this is completely inappropriate. I don't know why we're talking about this, But then over the next several days, I was thinking about work. What work? What am I supposed to do? And then as the moms called and as I posted on that next Tuesday, and it finally came to me, I'm like, this is the work. And I said, okay, God, here's the deal. I don't know anything about this. I'm not a therapist. I'm not in the medical field. I'm just a concerned parent who's had a terrible tragedy happen to her family. I will do whatever you tell me to do, but you have got to open the doors and you've got to lead the way. And that's honestly what has been happening. Like every step people connecting with me, being guided what to do, and, okay, being on other people's podcasts. That's how I can spread the message. And then, oh, you need to write a book. I'm like, great, let me just add that to the list of to-do things. I'm writing a book, obviously.
Right.
I started speaking about it, talking about how events do not define us, meaning like things happen to us all through our lives. And we can either give them a negative meaning or a positive meaning. And just 6 months prior, I had like written out all this junk that had happened to me in my life. Not fun things, right? And I said, okay, yeah, that's junk. What is one good thing that came out of this? Every quote unquote bad thing.
Right.
And I was able to turn each one around and find something good from the bad. And then I said, okay, now it's with your son. What good can come of this? Because I can't change the past.
Right.
Well, the good is going to be is that I'm going to help other people, teach them what they can avoid, what they need to do, give them value and meaning in their lives. Because, I think all of us struggle, whether we're high achievers or we're just average Joe, we're feeling like we don't fit and that we're not good enough. I know for me, I was always, okay, one more thing. Even though I've been a very high achiever all my life, it was one more thing and then I'll be good enough.
Right.
And that's never the answer. And so I look at my son and other people who feel like suicide is a way out and they don't understand their value. They don't understand how important they are. And I just try to tell people, if you look at some of the mentors who have changed your life, think about those people. And I know that for me, 2 mentors that had a huge impact on me, they both had suicidal tendencies earlier in their lives. And I think, what if they had acted on those and they weren't there later in life to have the impact they had on me?
Wow.
And I say, you are that person for somebody else down the road.
Yeah.
People need you. We need you. Stay in the game.
Yeah.
And that's what's just been happening. It's just like these doors have been opening, and I feel that this message is important. And the other thing is, my son and I, we were not, like, it was not an easy relationship. He was a difficult child for me to raise. He was alpha male, and at 3 years old, he let me know the pecking order in the house. It went dad, Christian, and then mom was way down on the list, right?
Then everybody else, and then mom.
Exactly. And so we struggled, with that. I wanted things one way, and he wanted them the other way. And then what happened after he said that back when he was almost 16 about, I don't believe in God, and he really, felt maybe this anger. A lot of teens get this, especially boys, that aggression. And it had been about a year of I realized I had to change the way I related to him. I couldn't just be this militant mom, my husband being in the military, of this is the way it is. I had to give a little more and appreciate him and allow him some more freedom in his life. But as I was thinking and really stressing over like, this is such a hard situation for me, I just had this like epiphany, and it was like, Christian is not the problem. You're the problem. And I'm like, what? That's so odd. Of course he's the problem. He's the one that's causing all these problems in my life, all this stress. And then I had this picture of us before we came to Earth in my mind that said, Mom, he was talking to me, Mom, you're going to have a lot of problems down here, and you need to learn how to be nicer and to be more Christian. And I'm going to help you with that. And I thought, wow, that was a huge change in the way I viewed the whole situation, that he was going through these things because I needed the help. I needed to become a better person. And I, over that time period, I did get softer and just better about being able to relate to him.
Right.
And now with this thing that with him passing on, I actually feel like he's closer to me now than before he was when he died, because of the help I feel like he's guiding me and directing me, and he wants this message out. And I feel closer, and I've been able to receive a few messages from other people have come and given me messages from him that the wording was, it was the right wording. It was not just made up or that type of thing. I knew it was from him. So I feel like I'm honoring his memory by doing this work.
Okay. So you feel like that work is both helping those who have gone through losing a child to suicide, or a family member, son, daughter, husband, wife, whatever, helping them understand and through the grieving process, as well as prevention of and detection of suicide beforehand?
Yes to all, because what I have found as the aftermath of the suicide has actually been almost worse than the suicide itself.
Yeah.
I never imagined the emotional turmoil that has been going on for months after this. And what happens is each of us in our family, we look at ourselves, we look at each other, and we're like, I'm to blame, or I regret, or I have guilt. All of these emotions. Mm-hmm. And we have to process through them and say, we need to stay together and be strong as a family. And nobody gets to blame, nobody gets to point fingers, and nobody gets to take that blame on themselves. We may have regrets, we may wish that things had gone differently, mm-hmm. but nobody gets to blame. And that has been huge, because you know that after tragedies like this happen, families fall apart, marriages end, and that's an additional tragedy.
Yeah.
So that has been huge, trying to manage all of the family's emotions and trying to help them process through this.
Yeah, yeah. When one of my brothers was killed in an automobile accident, he fell asleep at the wheel, and it's those tragic, those unexpected deaths, any of them, especially the suicides, they just affect so deeply your psyche and why did this happen? What could we have done differently? Why didn't I see this? Why didn't he stay awake when he was driving? All those questions really do. They can make you, and it is how you react to it. Mm-hmm. It took me probably a year to stop the anger of losing my brother. And someone would say something about him, and I just had to leave the room because I was so angry about what happened. Not at him, but just at what happened. And I think this is probably the same grieving process for all of us in a tragic death like that.
Right, because you hear about the different emotions that you feel, right? Mm-hmm. And this whole grieving process has been part of the difficulty on our family for those that are still living,
right?
Because we're processing at different times. I'm going through it a lot faster. And I think there are some reasons for that. Number one, I'm talking about it. I'm saying this is reality, not trying to hide it like I did with my dad, mm-hmm. and I'm talking about it. And by doing that, I'm healing from both my son's death and from my father's death. And then like I mentioned, I had some things happen back earlier in my life, that weren't ideal. I mean, my first husband left me 6 months pregnant. I mean, mm-hmm. Left me gone, nobody around, right?
Wow.
So 18 months of depression. Mm-hmm. And if I hadn't been pregnant, I probably would have, been very suicidal. And my child was what saved me through that, got me through that. And so 18 months for that, and then 5 months with my father dying, and now, with my son. And what switched me so quickly was a decision. I made a decision. And that's kind of where I am, whereas the other members of my family, the younger daughter has a really hard time talking about it, doesn't want to go to therapy, angry. She's very mm-hmm. angry. Mm-hmm. My husband and my other daughter have been getting help from a therapist, which has helped them. And before my husband went to get therapy for my son's death, he was in a very, very bad place.
Yeah.
And so that was something that I struggled with, is like, okay, and we're done now. Let's, move on. Let's make something good of this and let's go forward. And that's not where they were. And I had to allow them, and still allow them, wherever they are in the process.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a big takeaway for me is how each one of us deals with that grief is so different. It's depending on our personality and how it affected us as personally. So yeah, I can see that would be a hard part for someone. Oh yeah, I'm feeling like I'm dealing with this, and why aren't you keeping up with me? Why aren't you doing better at this? It is hard to process that. So.
Right, and I have to allow them their place in the grief cycle.
Right. So tell us a little bit about your work with some of the agencies in Utah and for prevention
Okay, sure. So there is an app that the University of Utah has. It's called Safe Utah, mm-hmm. and it's for high schoolers, for parents, and for teachers. And they've received funding from the state legislature to put this out. They go out and do different assemblies for kids in high schools and let PTA meetings and all of that. So I'm going to be doing some volunteer work for them at a booth that they're going to be having at the Salt Palace next weekend on the 27th, 28th, 29th.
Okay.
And just being able to have an app on the phone that's anonymous. These students or parents or teachers can report in and say, hey, I see some things or tendencies, or I'm feeling depressed. And they can have a way to reach out without, feeling like, oh, full disclosure or whatever.
Right.
And a lot of teens are willing to talk to a stranger more so than a friend or a parent. And already just this app has saved, for sure, I know, a couple of people's lives, a couple of kids' lives who have been willing to text in. And they also was able to identify someone who was a kid who was putting out threats against one of the schools, right?
Yeah.
So they're trying to do that. And then there's other things specifically for vets and first responders that I reached out and spoke with someone yesterday about that and getting involved in their fundraising and any activities there. And then someone else, a friend of mine that I've known for a while, she has a program that she's been putting into the schools. And now it's, more and more people are getting on board with it, and it's going nationwide, where it's having this club. It's called the Golden Gate Club. And what it does is it allows kids to develop soft skills, because you go to school and you're, learning reading, writing, arithmetic, and you're on technology. Mm-hmm. And so you don't always know how to connect with someone.
Yeah.
And so they have rules, about how you treat people and how do you interact. And just being involved with anything like that. I've reached out to these people and said, I'm available. I'm happy to talk with parents or youth or anything that you'd want me to do. So I'm just putting it out there that I need to get my message out, however it is.
Yeah. Yeah, we see a lot of that where people isolate themselves from the outside world. This is a perfect way, this cell phone in my hand is a perfect way to isolate yourself. And so many kids are they sit next to each other and text each other, and they really have never learned how to create a personal connection with another person. And so, having an app and having these ways to teach them these soft skills is so important in my mind, that we're losing that ability to talk, to make a friend, to be a friend, and to help our friends from isolating themselves.
Exactly. Because, when you're feeling depressed, what you want to do is go and isolate yourself. I know this personally, and I saw this in my father. You want to isolate yourself. You think that that's the answer, when in reality, it's just the opposite. If you're feeling depressed, if you're feeling sad, you need human connections.
Yeah, that's one of the things with Tribe of Kings is gives men a chance to get out and meet with other men and to be around other men and find out they're not the only one feeling that way. And so I think that's one of the benefits I have and I've seen with helping men get out of that basement and get out of that dark space they're in, and be able to communicate with other men and find out that they're okay. So
right. Well, an interesting and sad statistic is that I learned soon after my son's death is that suicide is the number one killer of our youth in Utah. Mm-hmm. It's the 10th largest killer in the United States. And the main demographic is men like 40 to 65.
Yeah.
And it's like, wow, let's talk about this more. If this is a number one killer of our youth and the 10th largest killer nationwide, why aren't we talking about it?
Yeah, we hear all about guns and we hear all about all these things, these evil people doing this stuff, but we don't talk about the thing that is the number one killer of young men and young women and men my age.
Right.
So.
And like I said, I was afraid to talk about it at first because of this whole stigma thing.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's why I'm saying I want to make a safe space where people can come and talk. And the more I've talked about it and I've posted, friends, whether I know them or not, or just quote unquote friends on Facebook, they let me know, hey, I have experienced depression. I've wanted to kill myself, or I have actually attempted. And people that I've known that I never would have suspected are telling me these things because I'm creating a safe space for them to share.
Great. So do you have contact information, or how would we get the Safe Utah app?
So if you just go on your apps, you can look for it, Safe Utah, and then they're going to be at the like I said, at the Salt Palace, but they're available. You can Google it as well. They're in the high schools here, specifically in Utah, but obviously they want to spread it.
Absolutely, yeah. Okay. And how do people get a hold of you to learn more of what you're doing? And
well, it's so funny because right now my website is larkgalley.com, and it's all about business training. And I'm like, wow, okay, it's about business training, but that's not really, what I'm feeling called to do anymore.
Right.
It just, this message about value is just part of my core, and I want to share that. And so what I'm going to be doing very soon is putting up that speech that I gave about defining events and finding meaning in tragedy. I'll be putting that speech up, and then also I've developed an emotional self-reliance course, and I'll put up module 1 so people can get that for free. I had to Google, somebody asked me, hey, you should do an emotional self-reliance course. And I'm like, I had to Google that. I'm like, what does that mean? Because I'm not the emotional person. And so I'm like, okay, I can do that and talk about how to build up your reservoirs of values, of self-esteem, and to understand what you can control, what you can't, so that when things happen, you have that strength inside.
Okay. So any final thoughts that you'd like to leave the listeners with as we come to the end of our show here today?
I have always tried to take classes and read books and trying to help my relationship with my son. My daughter even pointed that out to me after he passed away. And there was a book that I read right before he died that really changed me and helped me understand that we need to love and accept our children no matter what, right? And so we actually went out on a dinner date, and he talked to me for an hour, and he hadn't talked to me for more than 5 minutes in the last couple of years. He just didn't want to talk to mom. But he talked for an hour. I created a safe space where we were able to talk about parenting and what mom and dad did wrong and what we could have done better and what did he want changed in the house or rules. And we made some family rule changes because of that conversation. And I look back on my son's passing, which was 2 weeks after this conversation, and I think I am so grateful that our relationship had progressed, that it was the very best it had ever been, that I continually tried to work with him and to have a good relationship, even though it was difficult for both of us. And the other thing is, you never know when your loved one walks out the door, that could be the last time you see them.
Yeah.
What are the last words that you say to that person? Because they might very well be the last words you ever say. And to change the way we interact with other people and just have more love and compassion.
Great. Well, it's hard to come up with something after that, but I hope that today something resonated with you, that if you're having issues, if you feel like you're isolating or feel like nobody cares about you, reach out. Somebody does. And I want you all to know, if you want, email me, find my Facebook, and let me know. I would love to help anybody that feels like they're isolated or they have no worth. You can reach me at j@jwalter.com. You can always leave messages about the podcast, the radio show. I would love to hear you. I'd love to hear your suggestions. But most of all, please, 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 if you feel like you are of no worth, don't believe yourself. Reach out. Someone out there appreciates who you are. And someday you will be that mentor for someone else. So thanks again, Lark, for being on the show today. And thank you all for listening. And that's all for this show tonight. Thanks for listening. As always, thank you for listening to Rebuilding. I hope that you have heard something today that will help you on your path to rebuilding your life. If something resonated, if you felt a call to action, please take that action and rebuild. Let me know what you think of today's show or any of my shows. You can leave comments at rebuilding.podbean.com or email at j@jwalter.com. I would love to hear from you. Comments, suggestions, and topics that you would like me to cover are always welcome. Remember, a dream written down with a deadline is a goal, and a goal achieved is a dream come true. Until next time, I am Jay Walter, and I am always rebuilding.